May these words that I speak be grounded in my soul, encouraged by the God presence in me. And may these words you hear be captured by your soul and enlivened by the God presence in you. Amen. I remember the excitement when my training for ministry was finished and I had faced the interview board and been recommended for ordination. My dreams of a call to ministry were about to be fulfilled. And then I went to my first settlement charge on an Alberta Indian reserve, and my dream began to fall apart. I wasn't able to do anything. I was paralyzed by anxiety. I was told, for instance, that the church always hosted a Thanksgiving feast for all of the church members, and it was my job to organize it. But I couldn't get my act together. As Thanksgiving drew near, the feast was not going to happen. And then I discovered that one of the other churches had organized a feast for everyone on the reserve, including my church members. And my failure was compounded. That was only one of the examples of what was happening. But each failure ate away at my self-confidence. And I thought I was having a nervous breakdown. I made numerous trips back to Edmonton and the community that had been my support through my seminary years. In a talk with one of my professors, he thought that it was my fear of failure that was paralyzing me. Turned out not to be that. In a later conversation with that same professor, he said that my reactions to what was happening in my church sounded like what missionaries overseas often experienced when they arrived there. It was called culture shock. When he named it, that fit my experience. And that was, in fact, what I was going through. The identification of those experiences and feelings as culture shock really helped me 2 years later when we went to Japan as missionaries. Lorraine and I had far less trouble with culture shock then than some of the other newcomers because we anticipated and understood many of the experiences that we were to have. But I think that my professor's observation that I had a fear of failure was the more lasting and helpful lesson that I learned. He was right. Up to that point, I had experienced few of what I would call outright failures. And I found it difficult to acknowledge and cope with the ones that I had. I think we all fear failure. We often build up a wall to shield ourselves from our failures. Or we make up a scenario, a story that says we really didn't fail at all. And this is really what happened, something quite different than failing. And that is why I see Nathan's actions in this morning's scripture story as such a brave act. Nathan was a prophet of Israel. And as such, he considered it his duty to denounce King David for his moral failure with Bathsheba. But David was a powerful and volatile man. There was every possibility that when David was faced with the moral failure of his actions, every possibility that he would deny it and lash out at Nathan. And with his power and authority, David could put Nathan in very real physical danger. That Nathan was willing to risk that reaction and speak out boldly was a really brave act. And that David heard the story realized that it described him, and confessed his moral failure and abuse of authority, that was an even braver act. It didn't make him a weaker man. It made him a more compassionate and understanding man through the rest of his life, because he realized that he was no different from anyone else and just as prone to falling short of even his own expectations. It made him wise in his dealing with others, because he could understand what they were feeling. He had felt it themselves. He could understand why they were reacting the way they were. It is my hunch that in this incident, David learned humility and his own humanity, which was one of the keys to his reign being the greatest in Jewish history. Donald Trump has never failed in his own eyes. Whatever his mistakes or moral lapses, it's always someone else's fault. He will go to whatever extremes he needs to shield himself from his failures or to concoct a story that denies them. And all of the rest of us suffer because of the blindness of his vision. If Donald Trump faced himself and learned from his failures, he might become more compassionate and understanding as David did. And the world would be a far less dangerous place. But then we're all prone to do what Donald Trump does. I remember again back to that first pastoral charge. I went to a meeting of all the ministers serving on reserves in Alberta, carrying with me to that meeting all of the anxieties and the self-doubts that I have mentioned. At one point in the meeting, we went around the circle, sharing what has happened in the church we were serving. I listened to person after person sharing their activities and programs, and as each one finished, the other ministers would reflect on how they might adapt those activities to their situations and how their church could grow as a result of it. And as I remember it, that discussion was generating excitement and creative ideas. And I had nothing to add to it. When my turn came, I described a program that was happening on in my church on the reserve. Except it wasn't really happening. It was something I'd been thinking about, a kind of dream I had of what I'd do if I really got my act together. But I had to have something to share, so I just kind of shared this as if it had already taken place. And so things were happening in my church just as they were happening in all of the others. Except none of it was true. I remembered returning home feeling even worse than when I went. My failures and self-doubts magnified by the successes that all of the others had experienced. In retrospect, as I thought about it, I wondered how much of their conversation was true. Mm-hmm. I wondered if they had kind of made some dreams and hopes into actions, just as I had done. I don't know, but I wondered about it. But even more, I wondered what would have happened if I had shared my struggles and my anxieties. I wondered whether that might have changed the tenor of the meeting, when we would have started sharing what we were struggling with and how we might get through it and how we might support each other. I might come home feeling supported by the others, filled with hope rather than despair. Of course, the reason I didn't do that is my fear that I would be judged by the others. I would be found wanting. And that might have been true for some. I'm sure there would have been some there at that meeting who would have kind of considered me not as gifted as I would like to have been. But my experience has been over the years that in situations when I have admitted failure and experienced the judgment of others, it hasn't been all that difficult to hear. Because usually they haven't judged me nearly as harshly as I have already judged myself. And the overwhelming reaction I have usually received is one of forgiveness and support. Again, I believe that was the experience of King David, why he turned out to be the great man he was. Because when he admitted his failure, there were those there who helped him and supported him to grow as a person. And that's why I called this reflection today the gift of failure. Being successful, exercising my gifts for the benefit of others, feeling that others need me and respect me, of course, that's a great gift. That's the gift that Donald Trump feels he is pursuing. But I believe that when I look back on my life, I have come to understand myself more and have grown as a person in my failures much more than in my successes. That's when I realized how much in need I am of care, support, and love from others. Still, it's a difficult lesson to learn. Even when I describe failure as a gift, I receive it reluctantly, shield myself against it, convince myself that I'm just as capable and gifted as I dream of being. A difficult lesson to learn, and one that becomes more and more important as I grow older. Because as I do, I'm aware that frailties of body and mind will inevitably make me less and less capable and gifted and in need of the care and support and love of others. Can I learn to accept the gifts I need for the circumstances I find myself in? I think forward to the future, to the time when I lose my driving license and have to rely on somebody else for transportation. Or when I realize that the jobs that I once did inside and outside my house, jobs that I once took pride in doing, I'm no longer capable of. And I have to let somebody else do it and admit that I need them because I'm not able to do it. Or when I realize that my mind isn't as sharp as it once was, that my memory is not serving me as well, and I have to count on somebody else to get my life together and tell me what I'm to do next. Will I be able to accept the gift of the help and the love and support of others in those situations? Those are the struggles that I face. What are some of yours? Because yours are different than mine. But we all have things that we look forward to with some anxiety because we know we can't do it on our own, or we have experienced failure and we realize that there have to be ways in which we reach out to others. And what are the possibilities for turning those struggles and failures into gifts? Perhaps the story of King David is a good one to keep tucked away in the back of our mind as a reminder of how even a great person such as him could turn his life around when he admitted his failure. Let's have a few moments of quiet reflection.